I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. Josh Newbury.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a privilege to have secured a debate on a chronic but often misunderstood condition, one which affects many people across our country, that being the correlation between type 1 diabetes and disordered eating, known as TIDE for short. Separately, these two conditions are well known and well documented, but put together, they exacerbate one another and can, in extreme cases, become a life sentence. If we take them on an individual level, the former, type 1 diabetes, is a chronic autoimmune condition characterised by the pancreas being unable to produce insulin, meaning those with the condition are required to carefully monitor their blood glucose levels and administer insulin. As we know, that delicate balance demands constant attention. Many of us have the luxury of going out for dinner, choosing a meal based on what we like the sound of, with, shamefully in my case, often too little thought for the sugar content, calories, or how our bodies will digest it. However, for those with type 1 diabetes, that blissful ignorance simply is not an option. For them, life revolves around counting carbohydrates, monitoring blood sugar levels, and injecting insulin. It's relentless. To put that into numbers, a child diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at the age of 5 faces up to 19,000 injections and 50,000 finger prick blood tests by the time they're 18. Every moment of every day is a balancing act between food, activity, and insulin. Yes, I'll happily take an intervention from the Honourable Gentleman.
First of all, can I commend the Honourable Gentleman for Cannock Chase for bringing this forward? I spoke to him outside there, and he knows probably what I'm going to say, indeed he knows exactly what I'm going to say. I'm a type 2 diabetic, and I have been for almost 20 years, and understand very well the fact that monitoring food intake is part and parcel of daily life. Can subsequently understand that for those who suffer from an eating disorder, and constant food noise needs to be addressed with a professional, and currently diabetic clinics don't have the resources to deal with this. And would the Honourable Gentleman agree with me, we need to have those mental health support links for diabetics throughout all the United Kingdom. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a pleasure to take my first intervention from the Honourable Gentleman. And I would like to absolutely pay tribute to the campaigning he's done on this issue and the personal experience he brings to this House. I will come on a bit later in my speech to my experience of mental health services, but absolutely I agree with him that we need to make sure that people with type 1 and type 2 diabetes have got all the support with mental health and managing their condition that they need. So as I was saying, Madam Deputy Speaker, for some with type 1 diabetes, this morphs into a deeper challenge, disordered eating. And it's not difficult to see how that can happen. Given the strict attention to diet and nutritional information that type 1 diabetes necessitates, unhealthily restrictive and avoidant approaches to food can sometimes, at least to begin with, become indistinguishable from healthy diabetes management. And we know that in some cases, one of the side effects of insulin-based treatment can be weight gain. That leads some people with type 1 diabetes to realise that by restricting their insulin intake, or even stopping it altogether, they can essentially eat what they like and lose weight. But the medical consequences of that are stark, including kidney problems, bone wastage, amputations, blindness, and even death. One of the most insidious aspects of TIDE is how difficult it can be to identify until its devastating consequences for both physical and mental health begin to manifest themselves. People suffering with TIDE often say that the isolation that comes with trying to navigate both a chronic illness and disordered eating is unimaginable for anyone who hasn't experienced it. Happily give way to the Honourable Lady.
As someone with type 1 diabetes myself, having only been diagnosed 4 years ago, I completely understand the feeling of isolation, even just having diabetes itself, let alone having to deal with disordered eating as well. So would my honourable friend agree with me that we really need to destigmatise both conditions so that we can ensure the right support for patients?
Madam Deputy Speaker, absolutely, I completely agree with the Honourable Lady, and I thank her for the lived experience she's bringing to this House and how candid she's been with sharing her experiences, and I couldn't agree with her more. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, many people are falling through the cracks of a system that often fails to recognise the unique needs of people who live with both type 1 diabetes and disordered eating. And whilst disordered eating in those with type 1 is sometimes referred to as niche or rare, it's becoming increasingly clear that it's simply under-recognised, it's often missed. Evidence suggests up to 40% of women and girls and up to 15% of men and boys with type 1 experience some form of disordered eating. That's a quarter of the 400,000 people in the UK with type 1.
Will you give way on that point?
Absolutely, happy to give way.
Thank you, and I thank my honourable friend for giving way. He makes a very important point that this affects so many people, and I have direct family experience of this with a family member who had type 1 diabetes, and back then it was referred to as diabulimia, and wasn't able to get support for that because the medical profession just didn't accept that it was a condition. Does my honourable friend agree with me that part of the way we need to tackle this is by recognising how much of an impact it can have on all of our families across the country, and that's the first step to making sure people get the support they need?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Absolutely, I agree with my honourable friend that we need far better awareness of this condition and certainly better support for people affected and their families, and I will certainly come on to that a little later in my remarks. A key issue that we still face, as my honourable friend referenced, is the absence of internationally recognised criteria for TIDE, which hampers accurate diagnosis and classification, as well as collaboration and research. Within our NHS, fantastic pockets of practice have existed for a long time, but overall the current system often doesn't take account of the unique challenges faced by people with TIDE. Eating disorder specialists might lack the necessary understanding of diabetes management, while diabetes care teams might not be fully equipped to deal with the psychological aspects of eating disorders. The gap in knowledge and siloing of services means people with TIDE sometimes come up against exclusion criteria and will end up disengaging from services at a critical point in their condition. The need for joined-up bespoke services is where the 5 NHS England TIDE pilot sites come in. These trailblazing projects are combining diabetes and eating disorder support into one service, helping people to recover faster from TIDE and reducing repeated hospital admissions. That's where my interest in TIDE comes in, Madam Deputy Speaker. In a past life, I worked in the communications team at the Coventry and Warwickshire Partnership NHS Trust, and when they were selected as one of the second wave of pilot sites, I had the privilege of working on preparations for the launch of the new service. Although I sadly moved on before the service was launched, this was a highlight of my years working for our NHS. What I learned about TIDE in those few months has stayed with me, and the experience, expertise and dedication of Dr. Tony Winston and his team at the Aspen Centre in Warwick is absolutely to be commended. I'd like to pay tribute to CWPT and all the pilot sites for the pioneering work they've done to develop these services from the ground up, co-designing them with patients who at last are being heard and treated. Diabetes UK have told me that they've supported NHS England in the development of these pilots, and they're calling for long-term funding to ensure that best practice is shared and, most importantly, support is offered by these services on a sustainable footing.
Give way.
Absolutely happy to give way to Adjournment.
I thank him for giving way and also congratulate him on securing this important debate. Type 1 is incredibly demanding to live with. It's a game of numbers, and as such it can be greatly helped by technology which is developing rapidly. So I'd like to take this opportunity to get on the record how important it is that the government makes sure there's universal access to these to this transformative technology for all who are insulin independent with diabetes. But even if your iPhone can be your pancreas, type 1 diabetes is unique in its constant psychological demands, and it also invades your life socially as well as practically. And of course that means that type 1 combined with disordered eating is a perfect storm. So does he agree with me that it's really important that we provide not just practical but emotional support that's integrated around not just the individual but also the family to provide for that severe depth of need in this complex condition?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I completely agree with my honourable friend's comments on the need for technological advancement, and I'll come on to a little later in my comments on support for the family, but I think that is absolutely critical to have a support network around people with TIDE. Now, to the credit of the last government, they recognised the need for TIDE-specific services, but they allowed the initial 2 pilots in Bournemouth and London to close in April of last year. Those of us on the APPG for diabetes have heard stories of patients who've suffered as a result of this cliff edge. Having inherited a highly uncertain and unfunded position, I very much welcome the government's recent announcement of a 12-month extension for the ongoing pilots. That will ensure sufficient patient numbers and, more importantly, safeguard vital services where they already exist. I'd encourage the Department for Health and Social Care to seek additional investment through the spending review. because now that services have been up and running for over 2 years, our focus should turn to building up a national offer so that people with Tide in parts of the country, like Staffordshire, can benefit for the first time. Another vital effort will be raising awareness of Tide, particularly within general practice and eating disorder services, to ensure that people with both conditions receive tailored care. This isn't solely a call for increased training for healthcare professionals, but for greater recognition of the issue within the system as a whole. The King's Fund and Centre for Mental Health's report, The Cost of Comorbidities, shows that complications stemming from mental health illnesses in people with long-term physical conditions increases the cost of care by an average of 45%. In June 2022, a parliamentary inquiry into Tide was launched. It was very ably chaired by Theresa May and Sir Gerald Howarth, both then members of this House. At this point, I'd like to acknowledge the work of the Honourable Member for Harrogate and Knaresborough, who I've known for many years and who co-wrote this report during his time working for JDRF, now Breakthrough T1D. The inquiry gathered evidence from experts, those with lived experience, researchers and voluntary sector leaders. Their report was launched in January of last year, and key findings included the need for international diagnosis criteria, updated NICE guidelines, continuation of funding so pilot sites can become centres of excellence, better data sharing, and a Tide peer support offer to reach every part of the country. I'd urge the government to look at increasing awareness and training, particularly, as honourable friends have mentioned, giving families and carers the tools and support they need to be able to play their part in early intervention and treatment pathways. Diabetes UK are currently funding a research project into the prevention of Tide in children. It'll test out an intervention designed to help parents and carers recognise signs of unhealthy eating behaviours. There's lots of great work going on for us to build on. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll conclude by thanking the NHS pilot projects for all of their work, Breakthrough T1D and Diabetes UK for the briefings that they've given me, and all of the members who've contributed to this debate. We must do everything we can to support people with type 1 diabetes and disordered eating. This issue is not small, it's not rare, and it deserves our attention in this place. By raising awareness, integrating services, and providing support for families, we can help people overcome Tide and lead healthier, happier lives. Thank you.
Yeah. Mr. Ashley Dalton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'd like to start by thanking my honourable friend, the member for Cannock Chase, for securing this debate. And all of those honourable members that have contributed. My honourable friend from Strangford, who is quickly making his exit, but remains in his place, who spoke about mental health, and the honourable member for South Northamptonshire, who spoke about destigmatisation for disordered eating and for type 1 diabetes. And I'd just like to say that with her sharing her diagnosis today in this place, she is making a huge contribution to helping towards that destigmatisation, and I thank her for that. My honourable friend, the member for Gloucester, also shared his family's story, which is heartbreaking, and it really sort of shows us that these issues are impacting on people. And my honourable friend for Worcester, the member for Worcester, who talked about technological advancement and support. As my honourable friend, the member for Cannock Chase, outlined in his remarks, type 1 diabetes and disordered eating, or TIDE, is not a widely known condition, and yet it potentially affects up to a third of people with type 1 diabetes. People with TIDE find themselves trapped in a battle between needing to control their diabetes with insulin and trying to control their weight in an unhealthy way. This is a vicious cycle, and people with TIDE experience increased ill health and, sadly, an increased chance of early death. Studies have shown that people with TIDE who restrict insulin had a mortality rate over 3 times higher than those who did not. And Madam Deputy Speaker, we should pay tribute to the diabetes charities who are doing so much for people living with diabetes across the UK and are also tackling this problem head on. Beat Eating Disorders, which has dedicated helplines for people struggling with this condition. Breakthrough T1D, which funds international research to cure, treat and prevent type 1 diabetes and its complications. And Diabetes UK, which does a fantastic job of articulating the community's needs to government. I will.
I thank the Minister for giving way, and also like to congratulate my friend, the Honourable Member for Cannock Chase, on securing this debate. I just wondered, as was mentioned, I used to work for the type 1 diabetes charity, JDRF as it was then, now Breakthrough T1D. We used to regularly have meetings with ministers in the Department of Health, and one of the key things that I would like to see, and I'm sure members across this House would like to see, would be the new government take up the report and those recommendations from that report from Theresa May and Sir George Howarth. And I wondered if the Minister might agree to meet with the APPG for Diabetes and talk about how we can see those recommendations implemented.
I thank the honourable member for his intervention, and I'm more than happy to meet with the APPG to discuss those matters. I was really moved, Madam Deputy Speaker, to read about Lindsay's story on the Diabetes UK website, and one thing that really stood out to me was of her experience of turning 18 and moving to an adult clinic. And she said that she felt, and I quote, "I became a number in a system rather than a patient. Every time I went, I saw a different team, and I would have to explain my entire medical history. I felt like it wasn't worth my time, and I certainly wasn't going to have a conversation about what was going on with people I didn't know." And after just a few appointments, Lindsay stopped going. Now, Tide cuts across diabetes and mental health care. And I think Lindsay's interactions with the NHS show that we must never treat patients like interchangeable statistics, bouncing around a cold system that doesn't seem to care for them. Instead, each patient should benefit from a unique, joined-up approach. Madam Deputy Speaker, NHS England, to their credit, has recognised there is an unmet need for better treatment of Tide. And as my honourable friend has recognised, they have begun piloting type 1 diabetes disordered eating services, 2 of which came online in 2019. The aim of these pilots was to develop the evidence base around how best to manage Tide by testing an integrated pathway. This means that patients like Lindsay would not be obliged to recount their medical history on every visit. And in the past 5 years, NHS England has expanded on those original pilots, with funding extended for 5 Tide pilot sites until March 2026, to ensure there are sufficient patient numbers for us to get a full picture of what's happening on the ground. And I thank my honourable friend for his contribution to those pilots. While these pilots are gathering evidence, NHS England is looking carefully at the findings with a view to developing a future national strategy. And each of those 5 new pilot areas is submitting quarterly data to the evaluation. They intend to publish their analysis of this data by September this year.
Minister, very much for a very comprehensive and very, very helpful response. Minister, whenever I first came to the House, I came here in 2010. I think in 2015 there was a diabetes plan for the whole of the United Kingdom coming out of Westminster for all the regions together. It came to an end. I had always asked and hoped that plan would come again together. Just ask the Minister, would the Minister consider having a diabetes plan for the whole, all of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, working together, because we have the highest number of, I understand, of type 1 diabetics anywhere in the United Kingdom in Northern Ireland. Thanks very much.
I thank the honourable member for his intervention. As I'm sure he's more than aware, obviously health is a devolved matter. However, I'm more than happy to look at those issues that he's raised and come back to him on them. This data that the pilots will be sharing, it's going to be shared with all of the integrated care boards as well, so that we can build up a case for more investment in Tide from ICB budgets, looking at ways NHS England can support them with the way that they commission their services. These pilot sites are doing critical work while the NHS is supporting people with diabetes to live well. Central to this is making sure patients have access to annual reviews that cover 8 processes recommended by the National Institute for Care Excellence. We know that people who attend annual diabetes reviews have much better outcomes for emergency hospital admissions, amputations, retinotherapy and mortality. And that's why it's right that the NHS is investing £14.5 million over the next 2 years, supporting up to 140,000 people between the ages of 18 and 39 to receive additional tailored health checks from healthcare staff. This will include vital support to break down any stigma associated with diabetes, while helping them to manage their condition from blood sugar level control and weight management to minimising the risk of heart disease. Technology, as has been touched upon, plays a critical role in helping people with diabetes live healthier lives. And there's great potential to do the same for people with TIDE. NICE has made positive recommendations on offering real-time continuous glucose monitoring and hybrid closed-loop technology to adults and children with type 1 and type 2 diabetes, meaning that these treatments are now offered on the NHS. Over 2/3 of people with type 1 diabetes currently use glucose monitoring to help manage their condition. And following NICE's recommendations on hybrid closed-loop systems, England has developed a 5-year national strategy that began in April last year. And I know that 5 years will seem like a long time to many of those young people struggling with this condition here and now. But the NHS does need an implementation period to ensure we have all the right people with the right skills within the specialist adult services, because we can't compromise an inch on safety. And NHS trusts should only ever provide hybrid closed loop if the specialist trained clinical staff experienced in using insulin pumps and continuous glucose monitors are in place.
Will the Minister give way?
I shall.
I can speak from personal experience on the power of hybrid closed-loop systems and the safety they present from day one compared to conventional treatment with injections. So I would encourage them to explore every way possible to use collective peer forums or any other vehicles that can be imagined to accelerate that deployment of hybrid closed-loop technology as fast as we possibly can.
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention and his sharing of his lived experience, and I'm more than happy to consider those suggestions of his and take and discuss them further. But finally, I would like to touch on the encouraging work of the Early Surveillance for Autoimmune Diabetes, or ELSA. Type 1 diabetes is not preventable, but the sooner we reach people, the sooner we can care for them. ELSA is a children's screening programme that can detect type 1 diabetes with a simple fingerstick blood test by looking for 4 antibodies that are associated with the higher risk of developing diabetes. ELSA launched in November 2022 and already over 20,000 children have taken part. The study made a huge effort to screen them all by February, and we're still waiting to hear if this ambitious target has been reached. I'd be pleased to keep my honourable friend and the House updated on this. In closing, it is clear that TIDE is a serious and often overlooked condition that requires a more integrated and compassionate approach to care. The work being done through NHS pilot programmes, investment in diabetes management and advances in technology all represent meaningful progress, but there is still much more to do. It is vital that we continue to build on the evidence gathered from these initiatives to ensure that people with TIDE receive the tailored, consistent and supportive care they deserve. No patient should feel like a number in the system or be forced to navigate a fragmented approach to their health. But by working together through government, the NHS, the charities, we can ensure that people with TIDE receive the right support at the right time. And I look forward to working with my honourable friend to get this done.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. The ayes have it. Order, order.